almost fully open, and Race to World First all wrapped up, I think this is a great time to do a quick review of the new patch and take a look at how it's gone. One of my long-term criticisms of World of Warcraft has been the feast and famine approach to the game's storyline delivery, with a glut of new story and quests with the launch of a new expansion, only to be followed up with relatively sparse intro campaigns for major patches, along with the odd side quest line in the minor patches. The net result of this has tended to be narratives that have felt rushed and poorly paced, an issue which, despite some improvements in terms of the volume of quests in major patches in Dragonflight, resulted in that expansion story feeling a lot like it ran out of steam well before it was finished. The War Within's initial expansion storyline delivered what was for me one of the best executed and satisfying storyline experiences we've ever seen in the game, easily rivaling such giants as Wrath of the Lich King and Legion. And this contributed to one of the strongest starts for a new expansion, setting up an incredibly high new bar to be met. Meeting that bar was always going to be almost impossible, but that has not stopped the development team from trying, with a campaign which delivered not only the scale that I've always hoped for in a major patch storyline, but also a very satisfying narrative. It did not deliver the deep emotional hits of that initial launch campaign, but it was nevertheless very enjoyable, and this time it has been supplemented with an extensive series of side quest lines. While the story was still spread over 3 weeks, the size and scope of that story made each week feel like it made sense as a standalone episode. This is a stark contrast to previous attempts, where we would often struggle to remember the story and follow it from week to week, leaving it feeling more like arbitrary time gating. The only moment of mild disappointment for me was a relatively anticlimactic end of raid cinematics, where Gallywix in full caricature mode ignored the threat that the champions of Azeroth posed to him, only to fall victim to his own shoddy inventions. Thankfully, even this was quickly redeemed by the post-raid epilogue story, which delivered a poignant tale and a rather satisfying ending, which sets us up very well for what comes next. This all combined to provide a narrative experience of a scale that rivals a full expansion zone and sets a brand new bar for what we can expect from a major patch line, and I hope that this is a sign of what is to come for future major patch releases. The World of Warcraft development team have clearly decided to take a very big risk with the new patch zone of Undermine, setting the bulk of the content in a city and making it a no-fly zone in the modern Skyriding era was a gutsy move that could have very easily have gone wrong. Often though, good things do come from taking risks, and the team have managed to deliver what is the best realised city in World of Warcraft, easily surpassing even Borealis from Battle for Azeroth. While the zone is significantly smaller than the major patch zones we have become used to of late, the density of buildings and things to do, combined with a very high effort design, where most buildings are open for exploration, means that while we are always aware of the small size of the zone when travelling about, more on that in a moment, unless you go determined to hate it, you really don't feel at all shortchanged as a player. There was though one big missed opportunity, which was the rocket drill journey between Undermine and the ringing deeps of Zuldazar. Relegating this to a loading screen cinematic does leave the zone feeling a bit disconnected from the rest of the game, similar to the likes of Nazjatar and the Siren Isle. The deep run tram has been a thing in-game since vanilla, and reusing that mechanic would not only have made the zone feel a lot more part of Azeroth, but it could have allowed players to experience an epic journey similar to that ride to Mimiron's lair in Uljar. The new zone brought with it a new means of transport and drive, essentially the much speculated about dynamic ground travel system. Zipping around the road network of Undermine at high speed certainly does make sense, and while I found that it took a few days of play to fully get to grips with the new vehicle, once I did, I have been finding it very enjoyable, albeit the very high speed does make one extremely aware of the small size of the zone, in a way that flying doesn't in the other smaller zones like Mechagon or even Siren Isle. Part of that smallness does stem from the zone feeling so disconnected from the rest of Azeroth, and I personally would have liked to have seen Undermine be set in a much wider open zone area, perhaps that new area in the Ringing Deeps, where the station in Undermine could have been transformed into a landing cavern for us to swoop in on our skyriding mounts, something that would have offered a much more natural feeling transition into the no-fly area. The shipping and handling system, which is essentially a brand new take on quest delivery, has been growing on me. But beyond that, I do think that the new vehicle system is being underutilised, with only a handful of very short race routes. I would have loved to have seen those races be much extended in size and scope, perhaps even utilising the old world. Just imagine racing on your G99 breakneck from Ironforge down to Menethil Harbour. The other content mostly follows the standard template for a World of Warcraft mid-expansion patch. A mixture of world quests, rares, treasures, combined with weekly wrapper quests. Those weekly quests, which essentially just boil down to being a quest to do some more quests, have never been particularly interesting, and as time goes on, they have for me been feeling more and more like they are just weekly chores to do. And the sharp decline in the volume and spawn rate of world quests that we have been seeing since Zereth Mortis means that after the first visit of the week, it's all too common to log into the zone to find the map looking rather bare, with only those rares and treasures to do. The rares and treasures format was first introduced back in the Timeless Isle in 2013, and while it was very successful at the time, after 12 years, it's now a format that for me is starting to feel more than a little stale. The scrap mini events have offered a slightly new spin on treasure farming, and I have found them a bit addictive, and they managed the almost impossible task of getting me to engage with a treasure more than once. Unfortunately though, once you get all the rewards that you want from those scrap events, there's really not much reason to continue to do them. If I had one bit of feedback for the World of Warcraft dev team, it would be to encourage them to set themselves a goal of building a mid-expansion major patch zone with 0 rares and treasures, and using it as a forcing function to harness the obvious innovation and care that I can see being lavished on the design of individual elements in recent patches, and applying that to the broader gameplay loop. I love to see those fresh takes on individual quests and other systems, but right now the broader gameplay loop for these patches is in desperate need of a bit of a freshen up. And on the subject of those weekly wrapper quests, other than as an introduction to seasonal events, let's get rid of them please. I dislike using the term lazy. Game developers work incredibly long hours for far too little pay, but it's possible to do a lot of work and not achieve all that much. And let's be honest, a quest to do quests or to kill 2 rares really does not add anything good to the overall experience, and in my view, the time spent producing them could be infinitely better spent elsewhere. Moving on now from the open world to the raid, and as somebody who only raids normal and heroic in what I would describe as a mom and pop guild, I found the overall experience to be very satisfying, with interesting boss mechanics and what is one of the best raid interiors that we've seen in a long time, easily rivaling such giants as Icecrown, Citadel and the Nighthold. The inner part of the raid, where we fight the final 3 bosses, is set in what feels like a fully realised casino. So much so that, like the Tazavesh mini dungeon, it feels like the dev team missed a massive opportunity by not making this space available in the open world as well. That said, when you go to the Galagio in the Undermine zone, there is tantalisingly a way in that is just blocked by a couple of bouncers. You are going to add this as a mini zone in 11.17, aren't you, Blizzard? Go on, you know we all want you to. My one criticism of the race is in the boss difficulty curve. A normal and heroic, the final boss, Chrome King Gallywix, feels substantially easier than the second last boss. The idea of not testing content, especially the raid on the PTR, is often touted in the WoW community as a good idea, but in my view, given that this final boss was never tested on the PTR, it's very clear that Blizzard are a far way from being able to pull that off. Season 1's Mythic Plus season was widely described in the community as possibly being the worst Mythic Plus season ever, and that's a sentiment I fully agree with. Blizzard did make a couple of major mid-season changes to try to improve things, and going into season 2, in developer interviews the team did promise that further improvements were to come. While it's still early days, The WoW team do appear to have delivered, with the new Season 2 avoiding many of the major issues that we saw in Season 1. The combination of a significant reduction in the gaps between key levels, along with adjustments to when the various affixes are brought in, and most importantly, the removal of that toxic Challenger's Peril affix from the sub plus 12 keys, has provided a much smoother feeling progression curve without those jarring walls to further progress that I suspect caused many players to bounce off Mythic Plus in Season 1. One major contributor has been improvements to the pacing of the upgrade system, along with a massive reduction in the crest penalty for deplete. I do have one residual concern, which is that the gearing curve might end up being a little too fast, which could lead to the season going stale later on. But only time will tell for that, and I do commend the development team's willingness to take risks and test out changes like this. Moving over to Delves, and the biggest criticism I had of Season 1 was how quickly Delve-only players could run out of options to progress their characters, with the incredibly sparse drops of rune crests and an almost non-existent RNG drops of gilded crests, leaving them stuck with a bunch of half-upgraded hero track gear. Small wonder then that Blizzard observed that many Delve players would transfer over to the mid-tiers of Mythic Plus while being completely unprepared for the difficulty level they would face. In Season 2, with the previously largely pointless level 9 to 11 Delves now offering higher rates of rune crests, and the level 11 Delves up to 21 gilded crests per week. This means that for players who wish to progress their characters in Delves, they're going to find it a much more viable option, being able over the course of the whole season to cap out their hero track gear and potentially via the crafting system even dabble with even higher level gear. Blizzard have also taken the opportunity to shave off many of the rough edges in the Delve system, adjusting some of the affix-like mechanics and adding a fresh set of curios, some of which now feel genuinely impactful in a way that can change up player gameplay. Even as someone who does do quite a fair bit of Mythic Plus and therefore quickly reaches a point where Delves don't really offer much in terms of player power for me, I have still been finding Delves a lot of fun, regularly visiting them right to the end of Season 1, and I expect to do the same this time around. Delves may not be for everyone, but for the first time ever, it really does feel like there is a genuine alternative to Dungeons Raid in PvP for players who enjoy powering up their characters or who want to push themselves into higher difficulty combat. My only concern with their level 11 Delves is that they often have a tendency for the final bosses and some of the elite trash packs to feel a bit like damage sponges, and I would like to see the developers look for ways to reduce those enemies' health pools, offsetting it by something a little bit more mechanically interesting. One mechanically interesting change though I definitely do not want to see again is the bomb mechanic from the Underpin, this season's stretch mage tower-like boss. The Underpin fight is very interesting, but that bomb mechanic, at least for me, crossed the line from a fun challenge into an experience that was straight out so annoying that I'm glad I only have to defeat him once. The biggest disappointment for me was with the profession system. With very few new recipes and many professions get nothing new at all, this honestly made them feel a little bit forgotten. And while as a customer of the gear crafting system, the removal of the need to put work orders in to get enchanted crests is a major quality of life improvement, speaking as someone who specifically leveled up an enchanter in order to be able to create my own enchanted crests, that now feels like a major wasted effort with nothing to compensate in return. Blizzard have in recent years adopted the respecting players' time mantra, but this change most certainly does not respect the time that enchanters spent leveling up their professions and farming those recipes. Overall for me, the continued investment in improving both the delivery and execution of the major patch introductions has delivered one of the strongest starts to a mid-expansion patch since Legion's Argus. The dev team's willingness to take risks with the Undermine zone have certainly paid off in terms of the environmental design of the zone, and the introduction, albeit temporarily, of a faster ground travel system has been a success. But the obvious love and innovation that is being poured into individual gameplay elements is not translating into the broader patch open world gameplay loop, due, I feel, to a continued over-reliance on the now tired format of rares and treasures. This is a very solid addition to the world of Azeroth, but the open world gameplay loop continues the Dragonflight trend of feeling a bit like a feast and famine, with plenty to do in reset day, but often feeling like there's not much to do in future visits during the week. This does not compare well to the Legion of BFA era, where there were always new world quests on the map to do, even if you logged in more than once per day. And I do think that the dev team need to take a step back and rethink their approach. While delves do fill a gap for solo players, I don't want to see them or the limited time events become a replacement for the open world. But what about all of you? What are your favourite bits from the new patch? Or is there anything you would like to see improved in the future? Do let me know in the comments down below. And if you found this video interesting, informative, or just even annoying, then you can let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel or just to see more of my videos whenever they go live, then do hit that subscribe button along with the bell icon if you want to enable notifications. I will be back soon with lots more World of Warcraft news, reviews, opinions and guides. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.